Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute PBBI event here live on Facebook and, of course, archived through the PBBI Fresno State YouTube channel as well and on our library collection at Fresno State. It is going to be a brief event, but one that we felt important to do today, January the 19th, as we commemorate the 100th birthday of the poet who has passed, unfortunately, Portuguese poet Eugénio de Andrade. He was born on January the 19th of 1923, so exactly 100 years today. We're going to commemorate Eugénio de Andrade and his poetry with a brief presentation, and of course we're going to be reading also from his poems, because, as all of you know, the best way to pay homage to a poet is, of course, by reading his or her work. So, Portuguese poet and translator Eugénio de Andrade, who you see here in the painting, was born José Fontinhas in Póvoa de Atalaia in mainland Portugal. After his parents separated, the poet moved with his mother to the city of Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, and then to the city of Coimbra, where the famous University of Coimbra is. He was influenced by the surrealist thought and by ancient Greek poetry and Japanese haiku. And Andrade wrote spare, concrete lyric poems celebrating the body and, of course, celebrating the natural world with elemental precision. In Eugénio's poetry, more than any other I can think of, the sound is the sense, noted translator Alexis Levitin in his introduction to Forbidden Words, the selected poems of Eugénio de Andrade. It was published in 2003. Since then, Professor Levitin has published another one of Eugénio Andrade's books that we will be reading from a little bit today, and that I highly recommend all of them. Professor Alexis Levitin is one of the best translators that we have in the United States, translating Portuguese and Brazilian poets. And so Professor Alexis Levitin concluded, and I quote again, "The heart of his genius is woven into the delicate, minutely wrought balance of sound in his words." That is, of course, the words of Professor Alexis Levitin, who is Eugénio Andrade's translator. And before we continue to read a little bit more about this poet, Eugénio de Andrade, and here you can see some of his works of poetry, not all of them, but some of his works of poetry. One of his poems, and one of his poems that we'd like to share with you is called Desperate Song. Not even eyes know what to say to this rose of joy open in my hands or in the tresses of the day. What I dreamt is simply this, merely water, purple with cold. Within this grief, no rose can fit. Give me the shadow of a ship. The title of the poem is Desperate Song, and it is by Eugénio de Andrade, whose centennial we commemorate today. This is a very simple get to know Eugénio Andrade presentation, as we plan to have one later on this year. We will have a scholar from Portugal that will be making a presentation through the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, through our PBBI-FLAD lecture and conference series about Eugénio de Andrade. And we will have also a couple of other poet readings and some discussions. We are hoping to have a total, with this one, a total of 4 different events throughout 2023 as we commemorate the centennial of Eugénio de Andrade, as I said, born on the 19th of January in 1923. And Eugénio de Andrade, there's, of course, one could do a complete presentation of an hour about Eugénio de Andrade, but this is going to be a very brief one, just to get to know his work and talk a little bit about some of his poetry. So in 1939, encouraged by António Boto, he published a poem entitled Narciso in his first poem, still under his civilian name of José Fontinhas. He then, as I mentioned earlier, he was born and baptized as José Fontinhas, but then he, of course, used the synonym of Eugénio de Andrade, and that's how he is known in the Portuguese world and internationally. 3 years later, his first book, Adolescence, already under his pseudonym, was published, which, despite having been well received by some critical notes in the press, would later be kind of disowned by the author for aesthetic reasons. This position would extend to his second book, Purity, published in 1945. Much later, in 1977, in a joint edition of his work, he rescued 10 poems from those two books, bringing them together under the title of Primeiros Poemas, or First Poems. A bit more about Eugénio Andrade. In 1943, he settled in the city of Coimbra. He became friends with Afonso Duarte, Carlos de Oliveira, Eduardo Lourenço, and Miguel Torga, all giants of the Portuguese literary scene. And in 1946, he published an anthology of poetry by Garcia Lorca. He returned to Lisbon at the end of the same year, and in 1947 joined the civil service. In 1948, he published what would become his book of fame and his most widely published of his texts, As Mãos e os Frutos, Hands and Fruits. Around this time, he made friends and socialized with other poets, such as Mário Cesarini and Sofia de Melo Breiner Anderson. He settled in Porto, in northern Portugal, in 1950, where he became an inspector for the social medical services until 1983, when he retired. In 1956, his mother passed, a central figure in his poetry, in whose memory he published 2 years later the book Coração do Dia. His personal contacts with some of the Spanish poets of the generation of 27 and his friendship with Taylor de Pasquais and Jorge de Sena date also from the 1950s. Besides the titles already mentioned, he published As Palavras Interditas in 1951, Até Amanhã in 1956, and Mar de Setembro in 1961. There was a long interruption in his poetic production after the publication in 1964, and only until the end of 1971 did he publish a new volume, of poems, Obscuro Domínio. The interruption is important from the point of his evolutionary line of his work, and it is a pivotal moment in the sense of a turning point that results in the amplification of the regularity that runs from As Mãos e os Frutos to Ostinato Rigori, specifically at the level of the lexical and the semantic ranges. From then on, he resumes the regular rhythm that he had been imposing on his work. This will reveal increasingly peculiar contours that denote an acute awareness of the path that is being built, a deep sense of renewal, and a difference within a clear line of continuity at the same time. The second phase of his work, we confront works like Véspera de Água in 1973, Limiar dos Pássaros in 1976. He continued to publish many other books, of course, and such as Memória do Outro Rio in 1978, Vertentes de Olhar in 1987, Matéria Solar in 1980, and many, many others. He also, one of the things about Eugénio de Andrade is that he had this clear tendency to identify Eugénio Andrade in the Portuguese world with some anthological poems, mostly taken from his books, Green God, Goodbye, Lovers Without Money, The Forbidden Words, Poema, or Poema to his mom, or Poem to his mom, etc. He, of course, had other books that he published throughout, and later on in life, he had books like O Sal da Língua in 1995, Pequeno Formato in 1997, Os Sulcos da Sede in 2001. and Os Sulcos de Sede, translated to English by Professor Alexis Levitin, with the English title of Furrows of Thirst, which we will be reading some poetry from that as well. And I think this might be just actually a very good time to read one of the books, one of the poems from this wonderful book that was translated by Professor Alexis Levitin, published by Diálogos. And again, Os Sulcos de Sede, or Furrows of Thirst. First poem I'd like to share with you from Eugénio de Andrade, translated by Professor Alexis Levitin, is At the Mouth of the Water Jug. Walk syllable by syllable like the spring that only stops at the mouth of the water jug. There, agree to share the water, the audacity of the young, the timidity of those who no longer are, quench their thirst. To those who stumble over the absence of love, to those who gnaw tears in secrets, give drinks. Lift the feverish lips, the freshness of stone. Don't let fear multiply its claws. Syllable by syllable, walk to the empty water jug, now so full. At the mouth of the water jug, in Portuguese, a boca do cântaro, translated by Professor Alexis Levitin, poetry of Eugénio de Andrade, as we commemorate his 100th birthday, exactly today, January the 19th. He was born in 1923. Another poem translated from the new book by Professor Levitin, and the book is called again, Furrows of Thirst, Memory of Days. You come and go in the memory of those days in which love surrounded the house with early morning light. Sometimes news of you would come with a sense of wisteria dripping from the wall. At other times, with the sound of summer close beside the ancient gold of the sycamores. You come and go. And when you return, it is your dog who is the first to know. Hearing it bark, we always understood that love as well had reached the house with you. Again, Eugénio de Andrade, Memory of Days, from Portuguese, Memória dos Dias. Another one of the poems from this wonderful collection that I'd like to share with you as we commemorate the 100th birthday of Eugénio de Andrade. He passed in 2005, and it's called Outra vez o Tejo in Portuguese. In English, Once Again the Tagus. A boat is crossing the Tagus. It comes from childhood. I don't know where it's going. It is white, of that white given only to the birds. The river, which I haven't seen for so long, now is entering the streets of Lisbon to meet that much-loved light of the Jaracandas. I return to being 8 in this garden. I will lose myself in these streets, on those stone steps, where the cry of the seagulls rises straight up. I will run with the wind from corner to corner, climb with the trees, turn with them to fine dust. Outra vez o Tejo, translation to Once Again the Tagus, again from Professor Alexis Levitin, the translator, and the poet, of course, the poet that we are commemorating, which is Eugénio de Andrade. To talk a little bit more about Eugénio de Andrade and who he is and some of his work, and again, this is just a very brief commemoration brought to you by PBBI, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. This is part of the PBBI Fresno State and FLAD lecture and panel and conference series for this spring of 2023. This is the first of a total of 25 different programs that we will have now between now, actually started this last Tuesday as we launched the Madeira Initiative, Madeira Diaspora Initiative, and will continue until the end of May of this year. The spring semester program, the lecture and the conference series put forth by PBBI Fresno State. The poet Eugénio de Andrade also organized several anthologies, many of them with the considerable editorial success, as was the case of the Personal Anthology of Portuguese Poetry. This one was published in 1999. In the final phase, he organized another panoramic anthology, Portuguese Poems for Youth. It was published in the latter part of his life in 2002. Also a note are the collections of poems by canonical authors collected in the following volumes: Versos e Alguma Prosa de Luís de Camões, in 1972, Fernando Pessoa, Poesias Escolhidas, in 1995, Sonetos de Luís de Camões, in 2000. In Portuguese erotic poetry, he has organized Variações sobre Corpo, in 1972, and Eros de Passagem, Contemporary Erotic Poetry, in 1982. Another area of focus of the anthological volumes organized by Eugénio de Andrade is a collection of literary texts about cities and regions, such as Daqui Houve Nome Portugal in 1968, an anthology about Porto, Memórias de Alegria in 1971, an anthology that brings together a text about Coimbra, or even Alentejo Não Tem Sombra, an anthology de poesia contemporânea sobre o Alentejo, and that one was published in 1982. Besides these collections, the poet organized some anthologies with his texts: Antologia Breve in 1972, A Cidade de Garret in 1993, Chuva sobre o Rosto in 1976, Coração Habitado in 1983, Com o Sol em Cada Sílaba in 1991, and Os Dóceis Animais in 2003. In 1994, he left his address on Rua Duque de Palmela, where he had lived for various decades, and moved to a house supported by the municipality of Porto, where a foundation bearing his name operates. It was in this house in Passeio Alegre, in Foz do Douro, that he passed on the 13th day of June of 2005. Eugénio de Andrade dedicated himself to poetry, as it was written, and I quote, as a kind of a monk who sees in the poem the way to redemption. Eugénio de Andrade, we commemorate his 100th birthday today, again born on January the 19th of 1923, and passed, now here comes the month of June, on June 13th of 2005. We're going to end again thanking all of you who joined us on this very quick commemoration of Eugénio de Andrade, one of a total of 4 that we're going to have throughout this year of 2023. We will have some different poetry readings of Eugénio de Andrade, bilingual. We will also have a scholar from Portugal that knew him, a scholar and poet from the Azores that knew him personally, that will be talking about the experiences with Eugénio de Andrade, and one other scholar also will make a presentation about Eugénio de Andrade. So that will be throughout this year of 2023, not just in our spring semester, but also our fall semester, as the entire year throughout Portugal. There's going to be, as you can see there, many different exhibits and many different presentations to commemorate the poetry of Eugénio de Andrade. As we come close to the end, I'd like to read 2 more poems, and I'd like to try a little bit different experiment here, if you will allow me to do this, which is reading the poetry in both languages. Obviously, this is much better done with 2 different voices, but the poetry, again, is from this wonderful book, and as we come to the end, I'll show you a little bit more. I highly recommend it. It is out now by Diálogos Press, and it is called Furrows of Thirst, Eugénio de Andrade, So poetry by Eugénio de Andrade, translated by Alexis Levitin. Professor Levitin is a widely known translator and a very, very good poet as well. And this was just published just a few months ago, 2022, again by Diálogo Books. You can buy them at dialogobooks.com. Or you can buy it online at some of the other places, and also wherever you buy your books, even at your local bookstore. Ask for Furrows of Thirst, Os Sulcos da Sede, the poetry of Eugénio de Andrade, translated by Professor Alexis Levitin by Diálogos Press. And two poems that I'm going to read to you, the two brief poems, in a translation in both Portuguese and English. The book, by the way, has the poems in its original form in Portuguese and also in English. This first one is called Simples Pensamento, that's translated to a simple thought. É a música, este romper do escuro, vem de longe, certamente de outros dias, de outros lugares. It is music. This bursting forth from darkness, it comes from far away, certainly from other days, from other places. Talvez tenha sido a semente de chopo, o riso de uma criança, o pulo de pardal. Maybe it has been the seed of a poplar, the laugh of a child, the hop of a sparrow. Qualquer coisa em que ninguém sequer reparou, que deixou de ser para se tornar melodia. Something which no one even noticed, which ceased to be as to turn into melody. Trazida por veneno pequeno, sopro, pouco mais para tua alegria. Brought by a little wind, a breath of air, or little more, for your joy. E agora demora-se este sol materno, fala contigo o resto dos dias, como o lume ao chegar o inverno. And now it lingers, this maternal sun, it will stay with you the rest of your days, like the fire at the coming of winter. So in Portuguese, simples pensamento, in English, a simple thought, by Eugénio de Andrade. The title of our presentation, this brief about a 30-minute presentation, is All Poetry is Luminous. It comes from a poem by Eugénio de Andrade, one of the poems that was translated by Professor Alexis Levitin, Professor Poet Alexis Levitin, and it's to commemorate the centennial of Portuguese poet Eugénio de Andrade, brought to you by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute and as part of the PBBI-FLAD lecture series for the spring of 2022. And so, as we come here close to the end, I'd like to end it with another poem, sharing this one again, but from this great book, and here that you can see it a little bit better now. So the poem is here from the book Eugénio de Andrade, and again the translator is Alexis Levitin, poet and Professor Alexis Levitin, and the title is Furrows of Thirst, or Os Sulcos da Sede. And we're going to, again, if you'll allow me and be patient with me, we'll do this again bilingual to end this presentation. Escrevo, and in English, I write. And after this poem, and to end it, we will end with some words from the poet reading one of his poems, Eugénio de Andrade. Escrevo já com a noite em casa. I write with night already in the house. Escrevo sobre a manhã em que escutava o rumor da cal ou do lume e eras tu somente a dizer o meu nome. I write about the morning in which I listened to the murmuring of the whitewash or of the fire, and it was merely you saying my name. Escrevo para levar à boca o sabor da primeira boca que beijei a tremer. I write to bring to my mouth the taste of the first mouth that quivering I kissed. Escrevo para subir às fontes. I write to climb to the fountainhead e voltar a nascer, and once again be born. Poetry of Eugénio de Andrade from this great book that I highly recommend that you can get, and of course a way for us to commemorate here through the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno, the 100th birthday, the centennial of the Portuguese poet Eugénio de Andrade, born on January the 19th of 1923. And passed on June the 13th of the year of 2005. And if technology will allow me, then I'd like to share with you Eugénio de Andrade reading his work and reading his own work here. And so it is a poem called O Sorriso, the smile in English, but obviously he will read it in Portuguese. And with that, I thank all of you for joining PBBI, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno, another one of our lecture series, as we have, of course, 25 different events to put forth for you, beginning as it began on the January the 17th and ending at the end of May of this semester. Our semester actually ends around the 15th. We will have one event after the 15th as well, all part of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI, and Fresno State, and our PBBI Fresno State FLAD lecture and conference series. And here is Eugénio de Andrade reading his work.
O sorriso. Creio que foi o sorriso. O sorriso foi quem abriu a porta. Era um sorriso com muita luz lá dentro. Apetecia entrar nele, tirar a roupa, ficar nu dentro daquele sorriso, correr, navegar, morrer naquele sorriso.
And so that was the poet Eugénio de Andrade. Thank you all for joining us. Happy New Year once again, and follow PBBI and Fresno State. Thank you.